Welcome on this new topic for big data, which is open data for business. So in this presentation, we will explain what is open data about and how it can be an opportunity for organizations to, open the data. The first preliminary distinction I like to make is the different kind of data we are going to discuss. So the data, a piece of data in an organization can be considered to be either a product of the creation of the mind, in which case it will be protected by intellectual property rights. The second case of data that you could have is personal data about employees, about customers, about partners. In this case, personal data protection applies. And finally, you have the cases where the data is neither a creation of the mind nor personal data, in which case it makes it much easier to consider it as a candidate for open data, that is data that you can share with anybody. I'd like to insist finally that when we discuss data and is it protected or open or can it be shared, all of that can be also discussed in terms of cyber security, but that's a different angle that we won't discuss here today. So what is open data? Open data has its roots in the fact that public organizations such as states, cities, public companies collect a lot of data on users, on the weather, on many different aspects of the world. And the assumption with this data is that, it could be opened. The reason is that since these organizations are public, it should be in their duties to make the public benefit from their resources, from their data. For a long time, it has not been the case. Because it was not in the culture of these organizations to share the data that they have. Maybe, and if you remember the previous slides, maybe because these organizations were not very sure whether the data that they had was personal data, in which case it should not be open, it should be protected, or maybe this data was actually a product of their work and a creation of their intellectual work. In which case there would be these public organizations. They would be the owner of this data. So you had a lot of. It was a very slow process for public organizations to realize and accept that many data sets that they had were actually good candidates to be open to the public, because the public could use this data either to get informed or just to reuse this data for innovation purposes. A good example is the postal codes or the zip codes that you have in the UK. Zip codes are public data because they are created by, or they are at least curated by the Ordnance Survey, which is this public authority in charge of mapping and the cadastre in the UK. So they have this list of zip codes and which cities belong to which zip code and what are the geographical limits of these zip codes. All of this data should be public, but until recently, at least until 2006, it was not. If you if you wanted to have this data, maybe to create beautiful maps or to study, I don't know, elections, where people vote or whatever, you needed to have the authorization of the Ordnance Survey to actually get it, and they could say no to you. And if they agreed to share the data with you, then you would have to pay a large price to actually get this zip code information. And you have this famous article in The Guardian entitled "Give Us Back Our Crown Jewels," which was just making the point that zip code data is very important for any geolocalized service. It's public, and yet it was so expensive to get and so hard to get. So that was a very good case for opening the data. A second case is the one of scientific research. Much of the science that we see today is funded on public money. If you take the National Science Foundation in the US, or the Economic and Social Research Council in the UK, or the CNRS in France, or the NWO in the Netherlands, or the DFG in Germany, all these public institutes pay researchers to research, to do science. And when these researchers get results, they publish them in journals, in scientific journals, and these scientific journals are, many of them, the majority of them, are owned by private companies. These private companies do not give away these journals freely. They sell subscriptions to these journals for universities, for libraries of universities, and the price of these subscriptions is very, very expensive, at least a couple of €100 per year, and up to, for the most expensive, a couple of dozen of thousands of euros per year for one journal. So here we have, as to 2014, you have a developing movement saying that it's plain wrong. The researchers are paid on public money. They write these articles for free. They publish these articles on journals, which today are mainly online, so you don't have printing costs. So why should public universities and public libraries pay again for these journals that are made up of public work, of public research? So the open access movement, or the open science movement, which is developing, is just saying that this data and these papers should be open, because closed as they are, they just prevent patients or citizens to read the science that they paid for with their tax dollars. So as you see, there is a strong case for many public data sets, important ones, from zip codes to scientific research, to become more open. I'd like to insist that all of that is very interesting, but it's also something that can be true for business, for business data. The reason is that any data set which gets open triggers different things. The first one is, of course, if you open a data set, it expands the number of users who can use it. It's kind of obvious, from just your organization or the paying subscribers who can use it to anybody for free. It makes the user base more diverse, from specialists or from people who know how to access the data to anybody, teenagers, patients, anybody who would be interested in making use of this data. It accelerates the usage of the data, because you don't have to, if the data is open in a convenient way, you don't have to apply for for an authorization to get the data, and you don't have to go through a process to obtain it. It's just there for you to use. So it's much quicker to use. And finally, it broadens use cases, because you, as a producer of data, producers of zip codes or scientific research, you can't foresee how the data that you create will be used, because you created it for a purpose. So maybe that the zip codes were created for, for snail mail, to send postal mail. But actually now postal codes are very useful for any geolocalized application. And maybe that the Ordnance Survey in the UK did not anticipate that. So opening a data set just generates a lot of use cases that the author of the data did not imagine. And you see that these benefits are not specific to public data sets. My argument is to say that any company has in their organizations data sets that would benefit from that. So what would be 4 practical and direct benefits for an organization? First, opening a data set allows you to crowdsource innovation. A good example of that is Twitter. Twitter is the service where you can basically, as an individual, write tweets and read tweets, but it also has an API for any developer or company to access tweets directly from Twitter's servers and build applications with it. So for example, TweetDesk, which is a very, maybe the most popular Twitter application to read tweets, was not built by Twitter themselves, but just by a company that was created and used the Twitter API to create this application that millions and dozens of millions of people use today. And that was a very worthy application, since Twitter bought it in 2011 for $40 million. So innovation can be crowdsourced. People not only in your organization can create stuff from the data, but the crowd can do it. The second benefit is that it develops brand awareness and positive brand attitude, because if more people use your data, you will be cited and you will be used more. That's kind of tautological. So for many companies that try to make their brand more famous, or who try to make their brand known to a more diverse crowd, well, opening data is a very good way to do that. A third benefit is that it also it's a good material to enhance your corporate social responsibility. Companies today have in their duty not just to serve the interest of their direct stakeholders, such as employees, shareholders, and customers, but they also need to serve the interests of the wider community where they are embedded in. And opening their data is a good way for a company to create links and relationships with the community that very often they don't know exactly how to connect to. Opening a data set that anybody will be able to use is actually a major benefit that a company provides to their community. And finally, in terms of measurable impact towards a targeted group, opening a data set allows you to measure to what extent you reach this target audience. So to clarify what I just meant, if you, the World Bank has I mean, one of the major duties of the World Bank is to disseminate statistical information to the world, to the citizens of the world, in order to basically make the citizens more empowered in the state of their own countries, and just to make them more able to understand the global world that they live in. A way to do that, and it's very hard for the World Bank to measure to what extent they succeed in their mission. The World Bank were one of the first organizations to create an API system that made all their statistical data available to anybody who would like to call their API. And beyond the benefits of increased usage and increased innovation in what could be done with this data, for the World Bank it was also a very convenient way to measure the impact of their outreach, because it's easy for them to see who is using that data and in which context. So they have now a very clear view on their outreach. Okay, I hope you're convinced that opening data is an option that many businesses and organizations should consider. I mean, of course, not for all their data, but for some of their data sets. So how do you open data? I'd like here to discuss the 8 principles that were developed for opening governmental data. These 8 principles are actually, I think, they are good for any data set, and are very strict, but it will show you how you go from closed data to open data. So the first one is completeness, if you want. Opening data is not something that you open to a couple of users, or that you restrict with some privileges or rights depending on the users. Ideally, the opening is complete. You just provide all the data to everybody without any kind of restrictions. The second principle to apply is primary data. Ideally, you would provide raw data which is unprocessed, which is not aggregated, which is not modified. Let the users do these modifications and these aggregations by themselves. Provide them with the raw source of the data, because again, you can't anticipate how this data will be useful to the users. Timely is very important, not to open data from 3 years ago, but ideally you would release real-time data. Accessible, so the data should be opened with the view in mind that it would be easy to access. So the channels through which the data is opened should be chosen in order to make sure the data benefits to the wider range of users. So if you expect a lot of users to be actually Excel users, well, you should include an Excel export to the data. If you think that your data is primarily important to application developers, then an API might be better to open your data. The 5th principle is machine processable. So basically, don't release PDFs, because machines can't read PDFs. When I say machine, I just mean servers or programming languages. PDFs are very hard for machines to read, sometimes even impossible. It's much better to release data in a format that computers can read, such as CSV or text. Non-discriminatory, well, it's a bit like complete. The data should be released to everybody without a discrimination. Non-proprietary, I won't be able to read this. Non-proprietary, This means that the data should be given with a license that allows reuse, because if you open the data but then the users can't create anything with it because you have a very restrictive license on it, well, it's no use. For example, Twitter has released that data, some of their data through the API, but they have a very restrictive license of what you can do with it. So it's not the ideal. And finally, license free. Well, that's a bit like non-proprietary. Oh no, I made a mistake. Non-proprietary is about the format of the data. Like, ideally, the data would be released in a format which is not owned by a company. So if you release it in an Excel format, Excel is a format owned by Microsoft. That's proprietary. License free is what I just called before. The license going with the data should allow it to be reused even for commercial purposes, ideally, so that the data that you release becomes useful. You can express these principles of opening data according to a 5-star scale, which is famous because this scale was invented by Tim Berners-Lee, which is the inventor of the web. These 5 stars bring you from the 1 star where the data is just open, it's given to you out there, but maybe not in the best format, to the 5-star format where the data is open, but in such a way and with such a format that it's very easy to reuse. So it's a good scale to see to what extent opening the data, star 1, can go a long way up to star 5, where it's open and easy and productive to reuse. Finally, a couple of do's and don'ts when a business implements an open data policy. The first do is that you should do it in a sincere way. You have very adverse reactions and bad buzz and discontent when companies try to get the benefits of open data without incurring any costs. So, for example, the French Postal Service in 2014 organized a hackathon where developers were invited to get data from La Poste, so a kind of open data, but the data sets that were provided were not interesting, very limited, with a severe license on reuse. So basically, that was just a very bad just a very bad example of data which was supposed to be open, but actually it was just a kind of a promotional activity by La Poste without real openness. And finally, treat your developers well. It's not because your data is open that people will rush to use it. It's all about catering for the users that you would expect to use your data. So, for example, write documentation on how to use the data. If you organize a hackathon, which is this event very often in a weekend, where a crowd of people go and play with your data, very often for the benefit of the organization, well, you should organize these hackathons in such a way that the developers are not treated as free labor, but as worthy participants of a value creation event. That's it for open data for business. Thank you.